Let's get some reaction from our regular Monday panel. Former long-time Labor advisor Bruce Hawker, former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski. Great to see you both. Kerry, let's start with the One Nation performance in Queensland. It's its home base. It's where One Nation emerged from, and not that big a surprise that it now is in front. In terms of where the momentum is nationally, you'd imagine it would be strong in Queensland as well for One Nation.
Yeah, I think the surprising thing is that it's now looking as if it's across the country that its strength is growing. I mean, it's not just in South Australia where we've seen those incredible results, but it's also apparently in Victoria and obviously in Queensland. And you know, you're right. I mean, Queensland is where Pauline came from, and that's where she's got her family and her base is there. Her One Nation family are there. So I'm not surprised at that result. I think it should be a bit concerning though for both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. I just don't think it's a Liberal Party concern that she's actually starting to attract women and younger voters, because to me that's the most telling thing in this polling is that, you know, we've always been told that the women are not going to go to people who have strong views on matters such as, you know, immigration and things, but these, you know, it's now showing up that women and young people who maybe are feeling disillusioned with both parties or major parties because they can't get any traction about what are you going to do about, you know, things like cost of living. And the one thing we know about Pauline is that over the 30-odd years that she's been a politician, she's been consistent in her message. And I'm sure Bruce would agree with me when I say that consistency in message is what delivers you strength in political parties. And her message, much and all as there are a lot of people who don't like it, has been very consistent over a very long period of time.
That's true. And Bruce, to pick up on what Kerry said there, that it's not just a coalition issue here, looking at this analysis of the news poll, 35% of those that voted for the coalition at the last election are now backing One Nation. That's a huge number. But 9% of those that voted for Labor in 2025 are also saying they support One Nation. So it's not something to be dismissed.
No, indeed, it's not. And we have to be looking at why it is that people are deserting the major parties. In much greater numbers, I've got to say, though, from the Liberal and National parties than from the Labor Party. And much of that goes to the question of cost of living. When people are paying so much more for their petrol and for other goods, then they will always look to the incumbents to accept some responsibility for it. And that's, I think, part and parcel of what's happening here. That's not to dismiss what people are saying about those issues. Labor and the Liberal Party actually have to address productivity in a very serious way to make sure that everybody gets a fair shake in this country, and that it's not just left to people who live in regional Australia or on the outskirts of the city or in the most underpaid jobs are the ones who are going to cop it. And it's a very complex issue. It goes to all sorts of issues such as multilateral trade deals that came in the 1990s and early 2000s, and the changing way in which we've structured our economy. So a lot of that has to be looked at again, and we have to start asking ourselves, well, how can we make it a fair and more equitable environment in which to live and work? If we do that, then I think the major parties will be in a much stronger position. But I don't see this as being
you say
a
that,
massive
Bruce.
change at the moment. Sorry, go on.
No, in terms of what you're talking about there, in terms of the fairness question, I was just reading some comments by Michelle Ananda-Rajah, the Labor senator, and picking up on the report from Aspen Blomfield that we had just before a little earlier, ahead of our panel on the NDIS, saying that yes, that, you know, people are open to things on capital gains and negative gearing changes and so on. But Ananda-Rajah, the Labor senator, says the government's got to be better at reining in the NDIS explosion as well, because people don't want to see waste and don't want to see that worthwhile program being undermined because it's blowing out at an unsustainable rate. I'm just intrigued here, as we're a month out from the budget, Bruce, as to where the government's going on it, that you've got NDIS chief executive telling providers, be ready for significant change. And, you know, I ask you this, Bruce, in the context of the view, really, that it's the Labor government, if it's going to reform this thing, it's got to be a Labor government that does it, because it was, it was seen as a Labor idea, a Labor initiative. They're behind it, but you've got to get it on a sustainable footing. It could be the way the government has significant reform in this upcoming budget, or at least part of that.
Absolutely. And look, it's a great scheme. Let's not be in any doubt about that. There are a lot of people who have got significant disabilities living in our society who are much better off as a result of the NDIS. The question is, how much can the people support it, taxpayers support it, to make it an ongoing proposition? And that means that the government will probably have to be making some very hard decisions around the edges of the scheme, I would think. Where is it being perhaps misused in some instances by people? Where is it that if we do have to make changes, the impact is going to be less than in other areas? So that's the sort of thing we've got to think about. But it just goes to the point also that a lot of families out there support other members of their families with very significant disabilities. And it's something which we can't just walk away from. And I don't think anyone's seriously talking about doing that anyway. But I think in this budget, it's going to be all about cost of living. How do we relieve the pressure that's on people right now? And the government doesn't have to go to an election in the near future. So they can make some hard calls on other areas. But I think it's going to be largely about cost of living. But when you do that, that means that really worthwhile programs and funding decisions are going to be postponed. And that's going to have an impact too on our scientific community and others.
Kerry Chikarovski, what's your assessment ahead of the budget? It's a pivotal one for not just, the politics, the economics, but really, I think, for the nation, given how uncertain things are internationally.
Oh, absolutely. But the difficulty for the Treasurer is that, we've been talking this budget up as being one which is going to set up the country for the next, several years, and that it was going to be a tough budget, and that it was going to actually make some difficult decisions in order for us to be able to have that base, a solid base from which we could grow. I think what I'm concerned about is that because of the international situation and because of what's going on, with the Straits of Hormuz and oil supplies and all of those sorts of things at the moment, the government might actually not be as committed to making hard decisions, because, as Bruce has just said, this is cost of living. And if cost of living is going to be the driving force, then what can the government do to actually make sure that cost of living is actually a little bit easier for people? So, for example, will we see an extension of the halving of the excise? Will we see, more actual money in your pocket type approaches from the government, so that people can afford to continue to, cope with all the things that they're having to cope with, rising electricity prices, rising fuel prices, all those sorts of things. And so the double-edged sword, of course, for the government will be that if they do actually provide that cost of living relief in whatever form it looks like, without making sure that there are significant financial savings by looking at whatever that may be, taxes or otherwise, then we're going to end up with the government spending more and more money.
NDIS.
Putting more pressure onto the on inflation, and the RBA will be looking at all of that and going, well, hold on, you were going to be reining all of this in, and now it's actually getting bigger and bigger. We might have to do something about it, which indeed will be them looking at interest rate rises.
Let's not get ahead.
Senator Ananda Raja and the Australians, she said.
Sorry, just going to say,
I just want to
let's not get
Kerry
ahead of
about this, because Senator Ananda Raja says what we are effectively doing is winding back people's entitlements. She's asked about capital gains tax. If capital gains tax and negative gearing are reformed, we're effectively winding back entitlements. I don't want to see that wasted on unsustainable and poorly managed programs like the NDIS. I don't want to give an impression I'm against it. I'm not. But the government is talking about cutting it down to 5-6% growth. That's not nearly enough. We've actually got to cut it now or redesign it. This is coming from a Labor senator, Kerry. Yeah. Fascinating comments a month out from the budget, Kerry Chikarovski.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure you and Bruce both have got your own anecdotal stories about how the NDIS has been abused and how people have been taking advantage of the generosity of the government. And look, I know that, the government is trying to put in place ways in which they can curtail that so that people are actually genuinely genuinely getting the services that they're genuinely entitled to. But the problem is it's the sheer weight of numbers. The number of people who have now been included in the scheme, who believe and will continue to believe, even if they're taken off the scheme, that they're being hard done by because they were entitled to it. That's the political problem for the government. I absolutely 100% agree that the NDIS needs to be reviewed and reformed. There is no doubt about that. It's become, that cash cow to too many people, and that it's going to make it very difficult, to actually bring it back down. But because people have got that belief that they're entitled, working out how you move them off the NDIS, and I know there are other schemes that they're talking about for children, but moving them off the NDIS, that's going to be the political pain for the government.
But can I just say this?
Yeah, although, as I said, Bruce, I think it's Labor that can get it done because people have faith in them to do it because it was their idea. Sorry, Bruce, you go on. What was the point you were going to make?
We're getting ahead of the game here. The government's already indicated that there are significant changes that have to be made to the NDIS. So I think we shouldn't be preempting that too much. They know that they've got a very difficult balancing act to perform here. They've introduced those very significant benefits in the fuel excise and so forth, which was something which we were discussing last week, was very much the supported by and encouraged by the opposition. They have to make those sort of calls and they have to find offsetting savings elsewhere. I don't think there's any suggestion, seriously, that they're not going to be making significant offsetting decisions for that. And I think, though, what we're going to see is that that comes at a price. And we have to have that in mind all the time, that a lot of very worthwhile projects, in various areas of endeavour are probably going to have to be put on the back burner for a while. And that's as a result of what? Largely the actions of somebody in the United States who decided it was a good idea to bomb the hell out of Iran and now has no idea about how to get out of the problem that he's created in the first place. This was the unforeseen circumstances that the government had to deal with. And that's a challenge for a government, and they'll have to work through that themselves, but they've got time to do it. I think they've given more time for budget submissions to be made and to be considered, and they've got another couple of years before they go to the people again. So they've got some room to move in all this, but they've got to make some very hard decisions, and they've got to be looking at what's happening with people deserting, particularly from the Liberal and National parties, to One Nation when they feel the cost of living pressures on them. It's a big problem, and I think
now's the time
to deal with it. Yeah,
now's the time. They've got to show some, for want of a better word, some ticker and do it now, because it is. I think Kerry's right to also refer to that need for reform, because you can't balk, for those nation-changing reforms. They've got to get it done. Kerry, to pick up on what Bruce said, we should cover the tweet, the message from Trump, this expletive-laden social media post on Easter Sunday. And then, so does he go hard? Does he bomb in the next 48 hours? I had a couple of guests on earlier. They're convinced he will. And there's no sign that the Iranians will capitulate before any such another round of escalation, Kerry.
And I think the fact that he's talking about bombing, critical infrastructure, I think that's a real concern, and that must be a concern forget the regime, it must be a concern for the Iranian people, because if they don't have water or electrical infrastructure, then, they're really in incredible strife. But, the problem with this president, and we've been saying it now for weeks and months and the whole time he's been elected, is that he is unpredictable. I mean, he puts out a tweet like that, which would suggest that, yep, this is it, we're going to go in 48 hours and it's hell is going to be rained down on you. And I must say, and I'm sure Bruce would agree with me, I don't know too many Australian politicians who would actually use the F word in a tweet. They might do it unexpectedly or, inadvertently on in an interview, but not actually put it into a tweet.
Let it slip.
But I mean, it is his unpredictability that is the big problem, because, we all know that he will say things and then 24 hours later he says something else. But in this particular circumstance, my view is that he wants to win. There is no doubt he wants to win, and he will do pretty well anything he can to win. Now, what winning looks like may be different for him, and it will certainly be different for Iran trying to get a win out of it, and it might be different for the rest of the world. But he wants to win, so I wouldn't disbelieve him, but then again, I wouldn't actually be 100% convinced he'll do it either.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But Bruce, we've only got a minute left, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this as we wrap up this Easter Monday. Bruce Hawker, your thoughts on that intervention from Trump?
He may want to win, but increasingly in the United States, what they want is him to get out. And this is because for the last 10, 15 years, the main mantra in the MAGA movement in the United States is put America first. We want out of other people's wars. And he's been the chief beneficiary of that message, and he's repeated it constantly since 2015 when he entered the presidential campaign. And now he turns around and drops bombs on Iran, talks about putting troops on the ground, and wonders why his popularity is falling through the floor. And that's his big problem now. And that's, I think, part of the reasons why we're seeing these rants coming from him, because he realised that he's trapped, and he's trapped by his own failure to read the complexities of war, particularly war in the Middle East. And he will find that in the coming months, his popularity is going to continue to fall right at the time of the midterms when both the Senate and the House of Representatives are up for elections, that he could find himself in a real minority after the midterms. No control of the Senate, no control of the House of Representatives, and an increasingly sceptical public about his ability to act in a presidential way.
It's going to be a big November. I'm looking forward to covering that with you guys. So Bruce Hawker, Kerry Chikarovski, thanks as always. Have a lovely Easter Monday afternoon. We'll see you next week.
See ya.